Today. Welcome to another one of our Justice Talks. We are honored today to be joined by Senator Kirsten Gillibrand from our great state. She is a born and bred New Yorker, and Senator Gillibrand began her career as a lawyer, as many of us did, and then decided to pursue a path of public service. She served in the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development in D.C. In 2006, she was elected into Congress. In 2009, she was appointed to the Senate, where she has won re-election on 2 separate occasions. So clearly we enjoy having Senator Gillibrand represent us here in New York. And we share, her justice and the senator share a core mission, which is to empower more women in our community. And so we are so honored to speak with you today, Senator Gillibrand, about the path forward in addressing critical needs of women and families living in poverty in our community. So as you know, her justice stands with women living in poverty in New York by recruiting and mentoring volunteer lawyers to provide free legal help that addresses their individual needs as well as systemic challenges. And of the over 4,000 women we're able to help every year, about 69% are moms, 75% have experienced partner violence, and 91% are women of color. And our goal is to increase their access to justice in our civil courts, family, divorce, and immigration courts. Those courts aren't always user-friendly, and during the pandemic, that's been made even more complicated. And a report out just today by the Citizens Committee for Children of New York City has ratified what we see in our practice, saying that the hardest hit by this pandemic are low-wage working families and Latinos in particular. And you know, those are our clients. And the Annie Casey Foundation did a survey in the fall that said across New York State, 23% of adults with children at home said they had slight or no confidence in paying their rent or their mortgage on time. So things have not gotten better since early fall. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit from your important perspective on some of the critical resources beyond the civil legal assistance we try to provide, from SNAP benefits to housing, in which you obviously have a deep and rich background, that are vital for the safety and well-being of women and children living in poverty.
Well, hi everybody, and thank you, Amy, for the introduction and inviting me to join you today. I also want to thank everybody involved with Her Justice for the incredibly important legal work that you do every day to help women and families in New York. I had a chance to work on pro bono cases for survivors of domestic violence when I was working as a lawyer, so I know how the work you do changes the lives of your clients. I'm so grateful for all of you taking these cases to bring justice to those who need it most. Your work is especially important now as the last year has thrown challenges after challenges into the laps of women and families living in poverty. This pandemic has hit us all in very different ways, but we know that for low-income families, they are hit first and worst in times of crisis. Immigrant families have been left especially isolated by new policies. Women who are trying to balance work and their children remote learning, they often lack the ability to work from home or take paid leave. They have particularly been left behind with no good options. Between job losses and new demands on their time, there are now 2.2 million fewer women working than there were before the pandemic. And if we don't act, many of them might never return to the workforce. 1 in 5 mothers of young children are already unable to put food on the table, and millions are behind on rent. And all of these stressors, combined with the need to stay at home as much as possible, have created a pressure cooker for domestic violence, leaving many women and children in unsafe living situations. And as you know, court closures have left families in precarious situations and unable to change child visitation orders. These are the issues that future COVID relief packages have to address, because a recovery plan that doesn't include help for women and families is not going to lead to a real recovery. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to address these issues with the new administration, and I'm looking forward to answering all your questions about how we move forward.
Thank you. Yes, we're all hopeful. It feels good to feel a little bit hopeful for a while, despite the gloomy. A little bit. We'll allow ourselves a little bit of hope at a time. You mentioned immigration and how a lot of this burden has really disproportionately impacted immigrant folks, and we certainly see that all of our immigrant clients are victims or have been victims of partner violence because that's the area in which we work. So remedies under the Violence Against Women Act. So for listeners who may not be familiar, for example, a woman marries an American and she's going to expect that her husband is going to petition for her status in this country, but her husband is abusive. We have a legal remedy now that allows her to petition on her own so she doesn't have to choose between being abused and getting on a path to status in this country. And I want to thank you, Senator, and your staffers who have been incredibly helpful to us when we've had cases that sometimes get stuck, and I believe that's the legal term of art, when they get stuck in the process with USCIS or other places to help those get unstuck. Because those applications have always taken a while, but in the past couple of years, they've been taking sometimes 4 years, 8 years, literally until someone has work authorization, which for our clients is often what they are most desperate to get, the ability to work legally in this country. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit more specifically about ways your office prioritizes supporting immigrant women in New York. And the Violence Against Women Act is coming up for renewal, and any thoughts you have for what your involvement in that conversation might be, and any prognosis for what that process might look like in a Biden-Harris administration.
Well, certainly the protection of immigrant families and immigrant women is a top priority for me and has been for my office for a long time. I think Joe Biden and Kamala Harris share those priorities, and I think we will have real advocates and allies in the White House, which will be a welcome change from the current White House. One of the things that I will lead in the new Congress is the National Domestic Workers Bill of Rights, and that will be something that will allow everyone to work with dignity and the respect that they deserve. Among the protections, the bill will strengthen support networks for domestic workers who are survivors of workplace sexual harassment and assault. They will benefit from the Fair Proceedings Act, which will provide free court-appointed counsel for particularly vulnerable and indigent individuals, really dramatically improving fairness and efficiency in our immigration court system. And as you mentioned, we are going to try to pass the Violence Against Women's Act. It passed the House already in April 2019, so we will hopefully be able to get the Senate to vote on it next year. We still have those 2 Georgia races, so if we can win those 2 races, then we get to set the agenda for what actually we vote on, which this would be among them. Senate Republicans so far have refused to allow a vote on that reauthorization, basically because the NRA opposes closing the boyfriend loophole. The intimate partner loophole. As you know, that loophole is very damaging because it allows people to keep guns even though they have restraining orders against them, even though they've had previous violence, because they're not married. And that's just this loophole in various states that we have to get rid of. And the NRA, of course, wants everyone to have guns. The VAWA reauthorization would also expand access to services and protections for victims and survivors, such as housing and better judicial and law enforcement response tools. So I'm going to fight in the next Congress to get this VAWA, these VAWA provisions passed. And this is something that obviously President-elect Biden deeply cares about. He passed and wrote the first VAWA. And so he is 100% committed to reauthorization and renewing it and improving it. And then last, I'm part of a bipartisan effort that has been calling on the Trump administration to provide support for domestic violence victims. And so we were grateful that the first CARES Act included $45 million for the Family Violence Prevention Services Program at HHS. And I've also repeatedly called for Congress to provide additional relief funding the shelters, funding all the domestic violence prevention programs. I've talked to our providers across New York, and the biggest problem during COVID is there's an increase in number of domestic violence incidents, but because of COVID, they can't put 2 women, for example, in the same room because they have to keep them separated. So they're realizing that they have less capacity than before, even though the demand is greatly increased. And that's been a problem all across New York. So hopefully the House passed HEROES Act. They had $100 million for VAWA authorized programs. So we're trying to put some money in this next year-end bill if we can get it done, which we're trying to do.
That would be terrific. And, you know, as you said, not only have we seen that the folks who are struggling the most get hit the hardest when there's a crisis like the pandemic, but there is constantly these tensions of intersectionality. So for example, a lot of our immigrant clients were not eligible for some of the previous COVID relief benefits that came down because they didn't have status. If you're a domestic violence victim, we had clients who were unable to get access to their check because their abusive partner stole that check.
Yep.
They may not have 100% control over their financial, autonomy. So it's so terrific to have somebody who's thinking across the board like that, really understanding that you're not just an immigrant, but there are so many intersecting issues that really have to be considered when you put these practices and policies in place.
Without a doubt. And it's just been very, very rough for a lot of
Absolutely. Yeah.
women and children.
You mentioned earlier that you had taken a divorce case when you were a pro bono attorney. So thank you retroactively for that. Divorces are some of the hardest cases for us to place, but they're also the cases in the most demand, because we're one of the few groups in the city that provides free representation in divorce. And what a lot of people don't understand about divorce, especially among low-income folks, we always think about it in terms of a division of assets, which is true, but it's also a division of debts. And for our clients, especially, again, exacerbated by a COVID situation where people are losing jobs and don't have access to resources, if they don't have an attorney to help them, sort of pull apart that debt burden, they might be left holding a debt bag that isn't theirs and doesn't belong to them. So we're able to successfully persuade private attorneys to help with these, and we get private forensic accountants also to help to really kind of untangle that. Given that you took one of those cases when you were in private practice, I wonder if you can speak to the impact that taking a case like that had on you. You mentioned that taking pro bono cases has a huge impact on the clients, which it absolutely does, but we often hear that it has sometimes almost as great an impact on the attorney who takes the case themselves. And do you have any advice you might give volunteer attorneys who are taking some of these cases during this really difficult time?
Well, first, I would like to say thank you to all the volunteer lawyers. It's something that matters, and the skills that we're given at these law firms are really significant. And I just remember the look on my client's face that I would go to court with her and stand up for her and be a voice for her and say the right things at the right time in the right order. And it was just such a relief for her, because she was being battered by her husband. It was a contested divorce. He didn't want to give her a divorce. She felt she had no hope or power to stand up for herself in the system. And so just because she had a lawyer standing by her side, she just felt hopeful. She felt like her life was possible. And, I'd never been to that court in the Bronx, and I had really no understanding of what it would be like when I got there. But when I got there, I realized my training was what I needed, and I wasn't afraid. I knew just what to do. I had all my documents. I knew what to say. And you can go in there with great confidence, even if you've never done it before, because you've been trained to do it. And just the knowing, imagine all the people that have to show up to court not being lawyers, not having gone to law school, not knowing what documents have to say and what they have to look like. Like, it's such a gift. And if you can give that representation to someone who needs it, it's one of the best things you can do. It'll change your life, and you'll realize the privilege that we have, but also the power that we have. And then we can share that power by empowering others to use their legal rights to get free from a violent home, or to assert any other right that they have. It's quite a gift you can give someone, and having the tools to do that is very powerful.
Well, thank you. And we, our tagline is actually shift the power. So I'm thinking maybe we need to change it to share the power, but that's exactly what it is, that as attorneys, we have access to this secret code, this secret language, this way of understanding a system that was not designed really for lay people to navigate on their own. And we find when they go in there by themselves, they just end up short. So it is such a gift, as you said, to bring that special skill set to bear on the lives.
Even for your most junior lawyers who might be deeply intimidated to go to a courthouse that they've never been to go to a neighborhood that they've never been to, but I will tell you, you have all the training you need. You can do it. It's not hard. And you are helping someone and saving someone's life. So it's worth the risk, and it's worth the effort.
And getting back to how that's impacted you as a public servant. Obviously you're on the road all the time. You're meeting New Yorkers all the time. do you still remember those cases? Do you still remember that volunteerism? Do you think that has an impact on how you think about representing your constituents today?
Absolutely. It's the reason why I decided to commit myself full time to public service. I so enjoyed helping other people and helping them in the most critical points of their lives. And I learned all those skills in my pro bono cases. So whether I was helping a family get out of lead-based paint housing, or whether I was helping a woman who's been battered get a divorce, or helping a church set up a not-for-profit, I really enjoyed helping people in these crucial, very personal ways. And it matters. So that's why I ultimately ran for office. And now I get to do this work full time. And it's funny, not everybody wants to do this kind of work. Not everybody wants to fund bills for domestic violence survivors, or fund bills for homeless shelters, or fund bills for food stamps. But that's what I do, and it's why I do it. It's why I'm here. It's why I want to be a senator. It's why I ran for president, because I didn't think enough people focused enough on these key issues that are make or break for so many families in America. So I think for those who are doing pro bono work, or who are considering doing pro bono work, it's life-changing. And if we can give all our gifts back and give it to those who need it, you couldn't ask for a better life.
That's great. That's incredibly heartwarming, and I really thank you for your service. I think one of the things that I see when I represented folks, I saw, and what we hear from our volunteer attorneys, is how eye-opening it is to see what our clients do with what seem like the small tools we give them. And that for folks living in poverty, the civil courts are often feel more like a barrier than a place to get justice. And it's not the fault of the courts, but their life is such that, you mentioned before, partner violence. If you are living in New York and you want to leave the state to get a better job in another state, but you have a child with another person, you have to go to court before you leave the state. So just that ability to have mobility and get income means you have to go through the machinery of the court system. And so that it doesn't, sometimes just saying you're talking about a custody modification sounds abstract and unimportant, but it's essential to the lives of our clients, and really essential to their having autonomy and agency over the choices they make, in the rest of their life.
Very much so.
How would you, as you're going into work every day, obviously you're trying to work for the betterment of all New Yorkers, and especially these folks you've talked about that you're fighting for. Are there any really key priorities in the front of your mind right now? I mean, it is sometimes hard to think about post-COVID, and I know vaccines are being delivered as we speak, so things will change. But what's front and center on your mind right now?
The most important thing that we're working on right now is a COVID relief package, and I'm trying to make sure there's unemployment insurance in that package. We want to have at least $600 for each adult added per week, and each $600 for each child. We also are trying to get a lump sum $1,200 check into every adult's hands. I don't know if we'll be successful at that, but we're trying. And within these negotiations, I'm always working on food stamps, because there's so much food insecurity in our state. I'm always working on money for homeless shelters and domestic violence shelters, because again, to be homeless during the winter, during a crisis, during a pandemic, it is so frightening. And I've seen, even in Washington, when I'm here to vote, I've seen the increase in homeless here, and it's shocking. So many families are without resources. And so we want to get resources into our state. We want money for cities and states as well, because they pay the frontline workers. They pay for education. So we're trying, and it's hard. So that's first and foremost. Next year, I hope we can start rebuilding and really invest in job creation and job training, to maybe put money into infrastructure and to help unemployed individuals learn skills in the STEM fields, learn skills in the first responder and public health spheres. I want to train 1 million workers in healthcare to be our next health force so they can do the vaccines. So pretty much my biggest priorities are COVID related. And then last is national paid leave, because if we had had paid leave during COVID, you wouldn't have had to leave your job. You would have had your job, taken 3 months off while your kid was doing remote learning, and then could go back to your job. It would have been simpler for so many more businesses if they could have allowed people to go on leave and have that already be paid for.
Well, thank you. And we see, as I mentioned earlier, the majority of our clients are moms and they're usually heads of households. So they are these people who've had to make impossible decisions about, do I keep a job? Do I leave my job so I can stay home with my children? It's sort of the definition of a rock and a hard place. And they don't have the ability to afford childcare. So they haven't been able to really have freedom in choices as they go about that. Do you have any, I know you're in Washington now and the COVID relief package is being discussed now. Do you have any tea leaf reading you can do for us, or any thoughts about when you think you might get to the end of that negotiation?
We're hoping we can finish it over the next couple of days. Again, this bill is going to be largely inadequate for our state, but it'll have some money. There'll be some unemployment insurance to get into people's hands so they can at least feed themselves and their children. There'll be some money for emergency food assistance and some increase in SNAP benefits, some money for small businesses, some money for rental assistance for people who might get expelled from their house. Eviction moratorium, we try to extend through the end of January. More money for our healthcare workers and for testing and for vaccination development and distribution. So those are the top lines of things that I think are important. There'll even be a little bit of money for substance abuse prevention and treatment and mental health, which is really key. So we'll see. There'll be money for child care centers as well as for K through 12 education, rural broadband, some transportation money, some for the post office. We'll see. I mean, it's a start. It's not everything, but it's better than nothing because people literally need money to just get food on the table for the next month.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wonder if you have thoughts, whether they're included in the bill or just from your own experience, because you've done a lot of work on housing. You mentioned a couple of times some of the elements you're trying to put in there to support housing. I mean, what we're seeing in New York City among our clients, of course, is we have pretty good protections in New York City, compared to some places, but we've had this eviction moratorium on and off. And so people may not be getting evicted, but that doesn't mean, their rent is still accruing. And so what our clients are telling us is that once that eviction hits, they're going into shelter. It's not as though they've been collecting income during this whole time. So I didn't know if you had any thoughts about, some of the remedies you're talking about in the COVID package will certainly address that, but kind of longer term thoughts about what are some systemic changes we can make here? Because at least in New York City, affordable housing is just a persistent problem. And this was kind of, I feel like the thing that knocked it over, that made it so clear that it was not sustainable.
Well, so we're going to try through the COVID relief packages to do rental assistance and to hopefully create an opportunity to pay, to give people money so they can pay their back rent and so they can actually pay their mortgage if it's been had a moratorium. So we understand housing assistance is urgent and real. So we'll keep putting money into that particular pocket. But long term, we need to really incentivize the building of long-term affordable housing and have it in every community. And we have to move away from the shelter model long term. I think it is better to house people in real apartments that is theirs until they can start paying their rent, and then they can pay their rent and stay there and then transition to a different apartment over time. But when I did run for president, I traveled around the country, and the best models to deal with homelessness were giving real apartments to families and to individuals so they could live in a neighborhood and have a community around them and certainty and stability, which is better for everybody, and not use the shelter model.
I absolutely agree with you personally. I mean, I think the same thing in the domestic violence field. It's almost as though we make someone get as low as possible before we give them the opportunity to lift up. So when domestic violence victims are
smart. And
it's
unsafe. It's not safe. So
absolutely,
we should just be, the not-for-profits around the country should be supported in acquiring property, and they should acquire great deals of property at very low rates. That would be, I would ask every mayor in America, when anybody does develop anything, that you create a provision in that development for low-income housing, for those in gravest need, and just make sure all our communities are full communities.
Yeah, great point. And do you think there's any hope? As I mentioned, about a third of our clients are immigrant are filing for immigration relief, and they weren't eligible for any of the benefits under the last COVID package. Do you think there's any chance that they might be eligible? Or so, and many of them live in mixed households, right, where some members may be eligible and other members are not eligible. Do you think there's any chance they might be eligible for some of the relief that we hope is coming down the line?
We're trying to get a provision in that if you have a federal ID number, that you are eligible. So if one person in the household has a federal ID number, resources for the whole household can be available.
Oh, that would be terrific, because as I said, very often it's a mixed
It's being
household.
negotiated right now. We're holding our breath and hoping it stays in, because that would help New York enormously.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, yeah, and in the city, the whole state, but particularly in the city, we obviously have such a diverse community and such mixed households.
Well, if we can peg benefits to a federal ID number, it just opens the gamut to access for lots of hardworking families in New York.
And interestingly, one of the getting back to the VAWA reauthorization, you know, for, as I mentioned, for a lot of our clients applying for status, obviously they want status, but sometimes even more, they want work authorization because they're here, they want to be making a living for themselves and their families. And what's happened over the last couple of years is that those two decisions are made at the same time. It used to be you could file for status and get temporary work authorization, and then eventually your final status would be decided. Now they're deciding work authorization at the same time as they decide status, which means we have many clients who've been waiting for work authorization for years. So they're put in this crazy position where we've said, we know you filed, you can't work legally, don't commit any crimes, but you know, you don't have a choice. So one of the things we've done is we're working with national organizations to interview prior VAWA applicants we've worked with who've obtained work authorization and what they've been able to accomplish during that time. And I wonder if you meet those folks, you know, when you're traveling the state, the folks who petitioned for status in this country and who've been working and paying taxes all that time, and what their role is in the overall well-being of the state of New York.
Well, I think those individuals are very much important parts of our communities, and lots of them are frontline workers right now. So making sure that they can not only earn status and then be able to continue to work, because a lot of them are working anyway, despite not having authorization. It's important that we recognize how important they are to our whole community. So we are working on these provisions through comprehensive immigration reform and other larger reform bills. But I know that at least we'll have a partner in President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris, because they care about these issues. So I'm very eager to have partners in the White House who actually want to care about our communities.
Thank you. And I have just one last question, which is a more personal question. I did not put on the brief, but it occurs to me as we're talking, we're both moms. My son is a senior in high school. And I think a lot about how I explain to him what the world looks like right now, because it's pretty stressful and confusing to be an adolescent in a normal time, and this isn't a normal time. And I know you're a mom and you're talking to your kids, and all of our clients are moms trying to explain to their kids why the world looks like this for them and why they're having to function the way they do. And I wondered if you sort of had wisdom or tips or tools that you've used as a mom to try to frame this moment in time over the long trajectory of history for your kids.
Well, so I have a 12-year-old boy and a 17-year-old boy, and they've received this moment in time a little differently. The 12-year-old is more fearful. Like for the first 2 or 3 months of COVID, he didn't want to go outside at all. And now he's a little more comfortable walking the dog and doing stuff like that. But the 17-year-old has thrived and has been able to study more, to understand that this is a time of great need and great fear for many people. And he's feeling very hopeful because we have a new president, and he's just old enough to understand that we will get through this, that we have resilience, that we are bigger than this, and that good people will prevail. And so he's definitely taken this in a more hopeful way. I think my 12-year-old is a little more scarred. I think all his friendships have moved online, and so he's just constantly playing computer games and talking on FaceTime with 6 kids at one time, all playing the same game. And it's so loud. We need a whole wing of our house, our apartment just for Henry because he's so loud. But anyway, so I just think younger kids are it's harder for them because they don't have the tactile, like, I want to see my friends, I want to go play baseball, I want to play soccer. Whereas the older, at least Theo, has been able to manage it. He's been able to stay fit, stay healthy, go meet a friend in the park. Like, he's been able to manage. And I think maturity helps. But
absolutely,
boy, the 12-year-olds, we're going to have a tough generation after this.
Yeah, for sure. I think I see the same thing with my 17-year-olds. And I think these digital natives also just take to the remote living very differently than we might. Some of it's more automatic for them. And then I imagine for my clients' kids, I don't know what they think of the systems. They have different, probably less easy access to that digital life.
They might not even have access to the same digital equipment.
Right.
And so remote learning might be extremely stressful for them and hard for them. And I think the isolation is real. As we've talked about, I think mental health is going to continue to be an issue that needs to be funded. I think we're going to have a new specialty in computer addiction that's going to be more and more prevalent for young kids. I think there's a lot of negative impacts, but ultimately, when we do have the vaccine distributed, I think people can feel that we can overcome anything, and there is light at the end of the tunnel. And for everyone, even our most at-risk, vulnerable communities can recognize that they did persevere and they got through it. The one downside for a lot of people is we've lost a lot of people. We've lost a lot of loved ones. So that's a scar that will take a long time to heal. But again, showing our resilience, it's kind of like getting through a war. In the old days when, it wasn't necessarily on your soil, but you had the heartbreak of it. I feel like that's what COVID is more like, living through a world war or living through a depression. Those are the life events that have happened in America that we were not here for, but our mothers and fathers and grandparents did persevere through. So this is our thing, and we've persevered through, and hopefully we'll build better systems as a result. I would like to build better safety nets. I'd like to have national paid leave. I'd like to have universal sick days. I'd like to restore and rebuild our post office. I want to rebuild finances like postal banking. I want to rebuild job training so everyone can be employed. I want to have a vision that we must have full employment as a national mission, that the Fed should actually have that as part of their mission. These are structural changes that I think we need to make in light of this pandemic and how it's so disproportionately harmed communities of color and low-income communities. And so we need to build back better. And with Joe at the helm, we'll have someone who wants to do it with us. So that's what I'm committed to. This has been a generational lesson, and I think it will leave us stronger.
Well, and that's a great place to end it. I really appreciate that vision. That's, we too sort of say, if nothing else, this has taught us that we do need to build back differently. We live in the courts, and we've seen the courts struggle with what's going on. We're anticipating a huge explosion of pent-up need for the courts once they're able to open. And so this is a time to really think hard about, okay, what did we learn? How can we use technology in a good way, but also in a way that doesn't ratify that digital divide and leave behind people like our clients? So there is a great opportunity to actually learn from this horrible war that we've all been through and build back better. So thank you. I'm very glad you have, you're there representing New York to build it back better. And we at Her Justice will also try to be your partner in building back better.
Absolutely. And thank you, Amy, for all the work you do with my staff all the time. It's really been incredibly important for me and my team. I think some of my team is on the call. I think Monroe's on the call, and she leads our constituent services, and she's told me just how vital your organization is and how much she's enjoyed working with you. So thank you for hosting this today, and thank you for just being at the forefront of justice.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it, Senator. And thanks to everybody who joined us today. We hope you found this conversation interesting. If you weren't able to join today, we will be posting it on our website so you can watch it and listen to it there. And please stay tuned for more interesting conversations to come. Let us know if there are more folks you would like to hear from. Thanks so much. Have a
Take
great
care.
day. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.